The call had been terse, clipped, delivered by a voice that sounded like it had been scraped across a data server. No pleasantries, just the coordinates and a name. Thorne. Aris Thorne. InnovateX. That last part, InnovateX, was the real hook. A name synonymous with AI breakthroughs, a titan of the digital frontier, and now death. My reputation, it seemed, preceded me even into the polished, hermetically sealed world of bleeding-edge tech. They called me in when the puzzles defied the standard templates, when the official narratives felt thin as spun glass. So I found myself pulling up to a formidable, unassuming structure on the city's industrial fringe, a stark contrast to the gleaming glass towers InnovateX usually occupied. This wasn't their headquarters. This was something else entirely. The gate hummed open with a deep thrum that vibrated through the chassis of my car. I followed a winding, asphalt path past high, windowless walls until I reached a secondary security checkpoint. A lone, burly security guard, his face a map of fatigue, waved me through without a word. I parked next to a black, unmarked sedan, its windows tinted opaque. Stepping out, the air felt strangely still, heavy with a scent I couldn't quite place, sterile chemicals mixed with something metallic, something ancient. The building before me was a squat, grey behemoth, its architecture speaking of a utilitarian past, not a visionary future. It was only as I approached the entrance, a reinforced steel door with a formidable swipe panel, that the truth of its former life became clear. This wasn't just a secure facility. This was a repurposed, closed-down prison wing. The narrow, high windows, barred and grim, the sheer, unyielding concrete, it all screamed containment, not innovation. I wondered what secrets InnovateX deemed so volatile they required such a fortress. Inside, the chill deepened, both from the air conditioning and the oppressive atmosphere. The main corridor was wide, fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting long, stark shadows. A colleague, a detective I'd worked with on a particularly messy embezzlement case, met me a short distance in, his expression tight. He was a good man by the book, but he knew when the book had been thrown out the window. UserCM. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice hushed. "It's unusual." "Thorne, the co-founder. Suicide, they say," I asked, already filtering the official line. He was found in his private lab office, locked from the inside. Biometric scanner on the door, only his print could open it from the outside once sealed. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. The further we went, the more the repurposed prison aesthetic asserted itself. Steel doors, numbered, lined the corridor. This wasn't just a wing, it felt like a labyrinth designed to hold secrets or perhaps keep them imprisoned. "Who found him?" I asked. "A corporate security chief. Thorne missed a crucial investor meeting this morning. Calls went unanswered. Security was dispatched to this off-site facility. The door itself looked thicker, more fortified than the others." "This is it," my colleague said. The security chief, a man with a jawline carved from granite and eyes that perpetually scanned, stood nearby, arms crossed. He acknowledged me with a curt nod. "The scene is untouched, UserCM. We just opened the door for my access. Everything else is as we found it." He swiped a keycard, then placed his thumb on the scanner. The holographic display shimmered, then glowed green, and with a soft thunk, the heavy door swung inward. The room was surprisingly Spartan. A single, large workstation dominated the space, its multiple monitors displaying lines of code, complex algorithms, and abstract data visualizations that meant nothing to me. A simple, ergonomic chair. A white board covered in hurried equations and diagrams. No personal touches, no photos, no trinkets. This was a place of pure function, pure intellect. And then Aris Thorne. A small, elegant pistol lay on the floor near his outstretched hand, gleaming dully under the harsh overhead lights. His eyes were open, fixed on some unseen point above, a look of profound surprise etched on his features, not despair. I stepped inside, my senses immediately on alert. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid scent of gunpowder, sharp and immediate, not diffused. Too immediate, perhaps, for a body found hours after the fact. My gaze swept the room, taking in every detail. The single window, high up, was reinforced with a mesh, allowing only a sliver of light to penetrate. The biometric scanner was on the outside of the door. From the inside, it had a simple push-bar mechanism, the kind you'd see on a fire exit, but it was engaged, locked. I knelt, examining Thorne's hand. His fingers were splayed loose, nowhere near the grip of the pistol. The weapon itself, a compact, high-caliber piece, lay flat on the smooth concrete floor, almost pristine. No smudges, no drag marks, no sign it had slipped from a dying hand. It looked placed like a prop. My eyes moved to the blood spatter on the wall behind Thorne. But there was something else, something subtle. A faint, almost imperceptible sheen on the concrete floor, not blood but a residue, and a tiny, almost invisible scuff mark near the edge of a monitor stand, where a foot might have braced or a heavy object scraped. I stood, turning my attention to the desk. The monitors were still on, a screensaver of fractal patterns now dancing across them. The keyboard and mouse were pushed slightly askew. A half-empty mug of cooling tea sat beside them. So, he shot himself. I mused aloud, my voice echoing in the small room. Then, with his last dying breath, he meticulously cleaned the pistol, placed it neatly on the floor, and then carefully wiped his hand to remove any residue before collapsing, all while managing to hit a very specific spot on the wall with the blood spatter, and then locking the door behind him with a system only accessible from the outside. That's quite a feat for a dead man. My colleague frowned, glancing at the security chief, who remained impassive. And that pistol, it's too clean, too perfect. This locked room, it's a stage, and Aris Thorne is just the central, tragic figure in someone else's carefully orchestrated play. This isn't blood. I finished, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the server racks. It's a thin film of lubricant, almost invisible. It's here. I tapped a finger against the subtle sheen on the polished floor near where the deceased's hand had rested. And it's not from the chair, the desk, anything in this immediate vicinity. It's a specialized industrial grade, the kind you'd use on delicate machinery, not office equipment. My colleague, ever the pragmatist, knelt for a closer look. You're right, it's almost imperceptible. He glanced up at me, then at the security chief, whose face remained a mask of professional neutrality. But what does it mean? It means someone brought it in, I stated, straightening up. Or more accurately, something that had this lubricant on it was brought in, and it wasn't Dr. Thorne. If he was going to end his life, why would he be oiling machinery? It doesn't fit the narrative of a man in despair, alone in his office. The security chief finally spoke, his voice low and even. The office was locked from the inside. We have video of Dr. Thorne entering alone last night. No one else went in or out until we forced entry this morning. I saw the footage, I acknowledged, my eyes scanning the room again, trying to peel back layers of assumption. But locked doesn't always mean solitary. A clever mechanism, a remote trigger, a timed release. There are ways, and this lubricant suggests interaction, a struggle, or perhaps a setup. Did Dr. Thorne have any enemies? Any ongoing disputes? The security chief hesitated. InnovateX is a competitive environment. There are always rivalries, but nothing that would suggest this. Just then, the office door, now secured but open, revealed two new figures. The first was the remaining founder, a man whose sharp suit and sharper gaze spoke of relentless ambition. The second was the lead architect, a woman whose intense focus was usually reserved for complex algorithms, now etched with a grim worry. UserCM, the remaining founder said, his voice strained, a carefully modulated grief in his tone. I can't believe this. Aris, a suicide. It's unfathomable. I met his gaze, noting the slight tremor in his hands despite his composed posture. That's what we're trying to determine, sir. You were close to Doctor. Can you shed any light on his state of mind, recent pressures? Pressures? The remaining founder scoffed, a flicker of something that wasn't quite grief crossing his features. InnovateX is always under pressure. We're at the bleeding edge, but Aris thrived on it. He was a visionary. We just launched Project Chimera, our most ambitious AI yet. He was ecstatic. Project Chimera, I mused aloud. I've heard whispers. Groundbreaking, apparently. Was there any intellectual property disputes surrounding it? Any attempts by competitors to poach talent or steal data? The lead architect stepped forward, her voice tight. There were always rumors. InnovateX is a prime target, but Aris was meticulous. Our security protocols were ironclad. She glanced pointedly at the security chief, a silent accusation hanging in the air. Meticulous enough to leave a trail of industrial lubricant, I pressed my gaze shifting between the two founders. Did Dr. Thorne have any personal projects, perhaps off-site? A private lab, a secret server, anything he kept separate from the main InnovateX network? The remaining founder frowned, clearly uncomfortable. Aris was dedicated to InnovateX. Everything he did was for the company. Not everything, the lead architect interjected softly, then seemed to regret it. She quickly added, he was a workaholic, that's all. Sometimes he'd retreat to a quiet space to think. A quiet space, I prompted, sensing a crack in their united front. Where might that be? The security chief cleared his throat. There's an old facility, a legacy data center we still maintain for archival purposes. It's off campus. An old government property we acquired years ago. It used to be a closed-down prison wing, repurposed for high-security storage. Dr. Thorne occasionally went there when he wanted absolute solitude for sensitive computations. Nobody else had access without his specific biometric clearance. My internal alarm bells chimed. A closed-down prison wing. That was specific, unusual, and the idea of absolute solitude for sensitive computations felt like a euphemism for something else entirely. And you have no record of anyone else entering or exiting that facility recently. Only authorized maintenance personnel, and their access is strictly logged, the security chief replied, regaining some composure. Dr. Thorne was there 2 days ago, according to the logs, alone. I need to see it, I declared, my decision firm. The office, for all its sterile clues, felt like a stage. The real story, I suspected, was hidden elsewhere. My colleague raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, already anticipating my next move. The remaining founder looked wary, while the lead architect seemed almost relieved, as if a burden had been lifted. The drive to the facility was longer than I expected, leading us through industrial zones before veering onto a desolate, overgrown road. The building itself was a stark, grey concrete structure, devoid of windows, surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. The security chief, who had accompanied us, unlocked a heavy, reinforced door. Inside, the air was cold and still, carrying the faint scent of stale concrete and dust. The corridor was narrow, lined with thick, impenetrable doors. This wasn't just storage, this felt like a vault. Each door bore a faded, stenciled number. We passed what must have been former cells, now repurposed into server rooms, their whirring fans the only sound. Dr. Thorne's section, the security chief announced, gesturing to a door at the very end of the corridor. It was unmarked, unlike the others, and looked even more robust. He had it specially modified. I examined the door. No visible locks, just a biometric scanner pad. My colleague tried the handle, but it was solid. Still sealed, he confirmed. He used a retinal scan, the security chief explained, and a voice key. Only he had access. This was it. If Dr. Thorne had a secret, it would be behind this door. The tension in my gut tightened. My gaze swept over the yet somehow unsettlingly empty corridor, landing on a barely perceptible scratch near the base of the reinforced doorframe. It was a fresh mark, almost too faint to notice, but it was there. And within the scratch, a tiny, almost microscopic speck of something metallic glinted. Not rust, something else. My mind began to race, connecting the lubricant, the locked office, and this secret, impenetrable vault. The pieces were starting to shift, that barely perceptible scratch near the base of the reinforced doorframe. It wasn't deep, just a faint gouge in the polished metal, almost lost against the brushed finish. But it was there, and it was fresh. My gut told me it hadn't been caused by a cleaning cart. It looked more like something heavy, something with a sharp corner, had been dragged past it. This wasn't Dr. Thorne's main office door, the one everyone knew. This was a utility door, tucked away in a quiet corner of the executive floor, easily mistaken for a storage closet. It had no nameplate, no indicator of its purpose, just a heavy-duty lock and the kind of blank anonymity that screamed nothing to see here. Which, of course, meant everything was to see here. My fingers traced the mark. It wasn't a forced entry attempt. It looked like an exit. Or more precisely, something had been removed from behind this door. I pulled out my kit, a selection of picks and tension wrenches that had gotten me through more than a few unbreakable barriers. The lock was robust, a high-security mechanism, but it wasn't impassable. It took a quiet 10 minutes of focused effort, the subtle clicks and shifts inside the tumblers a familiar song. Finally, with a soft thud, the bolt retracted. The air on the other side was cooler, stagnant. I pushed the door open just enough to slip through, then carefully resecured it behind me. The corridor beyond was unlike anything I'd seen in InnovateX. No gleaming white walls or polished floors. This was a service tunnel, narrow and utilitarian, with exposed conduits running along a low ceiling. Dust motes danced in the dim emergency lighting, disturbed by my entry. I pulled a small, powerful torch from my coat and swept the beam across the concrete floor. There they were, faint scuff marks, consistent with the scratch on the doorframe, leading away into the gloom. They weren't fresh from today, perhaps a few days old, but definitely recent enough to be relevant. The trail led deeper into the building's forgotten guts, past heavy blast doors that looked like they hadn't been opened in decades, past dormant machinery covered in cobwebs. It was a stark contrast to the cutting-edge tech just floors above. The tunnel twisted and turned, descending slowly, the air growing heavier, colder. I could feel the vibrations of the city above, a distant rumble, but down here it was a world apart. After what felt like an eternity, the scuff marks led to another reinforced door, less polished, more industrial. This one had a heavy chain and padlock, but the chain looked deliberately cut, then rethreaded to appear locked. Amateur hour. A quick snip with my bolt cutters and I was through. The air that hit me was sharp, metallic, carrying the faint scent of decay and something else, something chemical. My torch beam cut through the absolute blackness, revealing a vast, cavernous space. This wasn't InnovateX anymore. This was a relic. Rusty bars, crumbling concrete, rows upon rows of empty cells stretching into the distance. My breath hitched. I was inside a closed-down prison wing. The sheer audacity of it, using a place like this, hidden beneath the city, was chilling. Why here? What was InnovateX doing in a place like this? The scuff marks were clearer now, leading directly down the central gangway, past the skeletal remains of what might have been an old guard station. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the drip of water somewhere in the distance and the crunch of my shoes on grit. I followed the trail to a section of the wing that, despite the surrounding decay, felt different. The air here was less stagnant, almost circulated. The cells weren't empty. Some had been cleared, and in their place, a makeshift yet sophisticated setup had been installed. Not offices, not a lab, but a series of industrial-grade server racks hummed with a low, steady thrum, their indicator lights blinking like 1,000 tiny eyes. Cables snaked across the floor, connecting to banks of high-capacity data storage units. This was a data farm, a massive, clandestine operation. My torch beam fell upon a workbench nearby. On it lay a discarded energy drink can, still slightly cool to the touch, and a crumpled printout. I smoothed it out. It was a technical schematic, highly complex, detailing an AI architecture I didn't immediately recognize, but it bore the hallmarks of InnovateX's design philosophy. More than that, it had annotations, handwritten notes scrawled in the margins. The handwriting was familiar. Dr. Thorne's. My heart gave a heavy lurch. Thorne wasn't just aware of this place. He was actively involved, or at least had been here recently. I moved closer to the server racks, the hum growing louder. On one of the smaller, isolated racks, a screen glowed faintly. It displayed a log of data transfers. My eyes widened as I scrolled through the entries. Not just InnovateX intellectual property, but encrypted files from multiple competing tech companies, Horizon Dynamics, Neural Net Solutions, even some government-contracted AI research. This wasn't corporate espionage. This was industrial-scale data theft, a systematic pilfering of cutting-edge innovation on a level I hadn't imagined. And then I saw it. An entry highlighted in red, dated 2 days before Doctor. This wasn't just about InnovateX's internal rivalries. This was about a global network, a deeper conspiracy leveraging stolen IP for what? Control. Influence. He must have discovered the true scale of this operation, or perhaps he was trying to stop the Project Chimera transfer. The scratch on the door, the hidden tunnel, this vast, illicit data hub, it all clicked into place. Thorne had been here, likely trying to retrieve or expose evidence. He probably hadn't made it out with what he wanted. As I stared at the screen, a faint, almost imperceptible click echoed from somewhere deeper in the prison wing. It was too soft to be a drip, too distinct to be my imagination. I wasn't alone. Someone else was here, or had been here moments ago. The air, which had felt stagnant, now felt charged, heavy with a presence. I had stumbled into the heart of the spider's web, and the spider was still very much alive. I had to get out, and I had to get this information with me. The perfect crime was just the beginning. I knelt, my fingertips tracing the faint gouge on the polished metal doorframe. It was thin, precise, like a hardened steel wire had scraped against it with considerable force. Not a cleaning cart, no. This was deliberate. This was a tool. It looked more like something he had tried to force through a gap, or something had been forced into a gap. Something thin, metallic, and applied with considerable leverage. The angle suggested something being wedged out, or perhaps something having been pulled from a tight crevice. The implications snagged in my mind like burrs on a wool coat. If Thorne had been alone, had locked himself in, how could this scratch exist? Unless he wasn't alone. Or unless the locked room wasn't truly locked until after the killer made their exit. My gaze swept across the pristine floor, then up the door, noting the heavy-duty electromagnetic lock, the reinforced hinges. It would take more than a paperclip to get past this. I remembered the head of R&D, the one with the tightly coiled energy and the perpetually furrowed brow, who had been quick to dismiss the idea of foul play. He'd practically vibrated with impatience during my initial questions. And the company's other co-founder, smooth as polished obsidian, who seemed almost too composed for a man who just lost his partner. Their shared history, the fierce competition for funding and recognition in this cutthroat AI world, it all screamed of simmering tensions beneath the gleaming surface of InnovateX. The misplaced book, the half-finished coffee, Thorne's usual meticulous habits. None of it fit the narrative of a man in despair. It fit a man interrupted. I needed to talk to someone away from the company's controlled environment, someone who might have seen the cracks in Thorne's perfect facade, someone who had a reason to talk, but also a reason to fear. My mind went to a name I dug up from old company records, a former lead programmer, dismissed abruptly 6 months prior. Rumor had it, he'd been working closely with Thorne on a project that suddenly vanished from the company's public roadmap. My burner phone vibrated, a single, coded text confirming the rendezvous point. Not a cafe, not a park bench, a closed-down prison wing on the city's forgotten industrial edge. The request had come through a third party, veiled in a thick layer of paranoia, emphasizing the need for absolute discretion. Sensitive information, the go-between had murmured, about InnovateX's ghost projects and Dr. Thorne's true ambitions. This place, with its echoing corridors and the ghosts of forgotten regulations, felt like an appropriate backdrop for the kind of secrets I suspected were at play. The air inside the main block was thick with dust and the metallic tang of decay. Sunlight struggled through grimy, barred windows, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with my every step. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of my shoes on loose debris, each sound amplified and distorted in the cavernous space. The chill bit deeper than the October air outside, a cold that seeped into bones and whispered of forgotten despair. I found the specified cell block C, door 14. The heavy steel door, surprisingly still on its hinges, was ajar, a sliver of weak, artificial light escaping from within the otherwise dark corridor. Inside, sitting hunched on a rusted metal cart, was the disgruntled programmer. His face was gaunt, framed by lank, unwashed hair, his eyes darting nervously like a trapped bird. He clutched a worn leather satchel to his chest as if it contained his very lifeblood. He looked like a man expecting to be apprehended, his shoulders hunched, his breathing shallow. "UserCM," he rasped, his voice raw. "You came." "I did," I replied, keeping my voice low. "You said you had something for me." He nodded, gesturing vaguely around the desolate cell. "Couldn't risk it anywhere else. InnovateX has eyes everywhere, especially on those who know too much." "What do you know?" He hesitated, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance. Thorne. He wasn't just working on the public-facing AI. He had a secondary project, a highly secretive one. We called it Project Chimera. The name itself sent a shiver down my spine. A mythical beast, a hybrid of different animals. What kind of AI would bear such a name? It was designed to mimic human thought patterns, not just to predict, but to replicate them, to innovate independently. Thorne believed it was the key to true AI beyond anything else on the market. He paused, taking a shaky breath, his eyes wide with a manic intensity. But there were ethical concerns, huge ones. He was pushing boundaries, bypassing internal checks, ignoring every warning. He was racing towards something he believed would change everything. And you were part of it. Until I raised objections. I saw what it could become, the risks. Thorne, he dismissed me, said I was holding back progress, said I didn't understand his vision. A bitter laugh escaped him. His vision was about to make InnovateX untouchable, and him a guard. What happened to Chimera after you left? It went underground. Thorne continued it off the books with a select few. I think he was close to a breakthrough, and someone wanted it badly. He finally looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. I kept copies. My work, my warnings. I knew one day someone would need to see them. He thrust the satchel forward. "These are the preliminary research notes, the ethical reviews I drafted, my internal memos warning against it. And this." He pulled out a small, encrypted USB drive. "This is a partial backup of the project's early code before I was locked out." "You think this is why he was killed?" I inquired, taking the drive. "It's the only thing that makes sense." Thorne was fiercely protective of Chimera. He wouldn't have shared it willingly. Someone broke into his vault, his mind, and stole his greatest secret, and they wouldn't have left him alive to tell. My mind raced. A project of this magnitude, operating in secret, bypassing ethical guidelines, the potential for immense wealth, and just as immense destruction. This wasn't just about corporate rivalries anymore. This was about something far more dangerous. If Thorne was close to a breakthrough, someone could have wanted that breakthrough for themselves, or perhaps wanted to stop it from ever seeing the light of day. The scratch on the doorframe, perhaps it wasn't about breaking in, but about the killer disabling a hidden lock from the inside, a desperate attempt by Thorne to secure the door after the killer had already entered. Or the killer left something behind, manipulating the lock to make it appear secured after they slipped away. The co-founder, the smooth one. He always had a keen interest in Chimera, even when it was supposed to be shelved. He and Thorne had a major falling out about its direction a few weeks ago. A very public, very heated argument that everyone at InnovateX tried to pretend didn't happen. The kind of argument where words like theft and sabotage were thrown around, even if nobody dared to repeat them. This was it. A direct link, a clear motive for the other co-founder. Control, ownership, perhaps even fear of what Thorne was creating. The locked room could have been breached through an insider's access, or through a confrontation inside the office that turned deadly. The scratch could be the killer using a tool to ensure the door appeared locked from the outside after they left. "Thank I said, securing the satchel and the drive. He gave a weak smile. "Just want the truth out." Thorne was brilliant but dangerously ambitious. Project Chimera, a secret AI designed to replicate human thought, to innovate beyond its creators. The implications were enormous, terrifying. And now I had a prime suspect with both motive and potential opportunity, and a tangible lead to begin unraveling the how of the locked room. The scratch, the hidden project, the rival co-founder, the pieces were beginning to align, forming a far more sinister picture than a simple, desperate act of suicide. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was a race for the future, and someone had killed to win. The air in the closed-down prison wing hung heavy, thick with the scent of decay and forgotten despair. Rusting bars cast skeletal shadows across the grimy concrete floor, and the only sound was the drip Drip, drip of water somewhere in the labyrinthine corridors. I'd chosen this place for a reason. Its oppressive silence, its stark isolation, felt like the perfect stage for an unveiling. No gleaming tech, no polished surfaces here to hide behind. Just raw, exposed truth. I checked my watch. 5 minutes late. Not surprising. The powerful rarely hurried for anyone, especially when they believed they held all the cards. Then, the distant echo of footsteps. Not the heavy, measured tread of a security guard, but something lighter, quicker, yet still confident. The sound grew, bouncing off the high ceilings, until a figure emerged from the gloom at the end of the long corridor. It was the co-founder, their silhouette framed by the faint light filtering through a barred window high above. UserCM. The co-founder's voice was a low rumble, surprisingly calm. A strange choice of venue, I expected. A cafe, perhaps, clean image of a company like InnovateX. The co-founder stopped a few feet from me, hands casually in their pockets, eyes narrowed. I'm not sure what you're implying. Oh, I think you are, I countered, stepping closer, forcing them to hold their ground. I think you knew exactly what I was implying when I suggested we meet here to discuss Thorne's suicide. A flicker of something, annoyance, fear, crossed their face before it settled back into a mask of cool indifference. Thorne's death was a tragedy. UserCM. A sad end for a brilliant mind overwhelmed by his own creations. Overwhelmed or overridden, I let the question hang, watching for any tell. The official report said suicide. The locked office, the note, the apparent despair. It all fit neatly, didn't it? Too neatly. I started pacing slowly, weaving a narrative with my words, painting a picture they couldn't escape. Thorne was on the verge of something revolutionary, something that would have changed everything. His AI wasn't just another product, it was a legacy that you, the other co-founder, stood to lose control of entirely. The co-founder scoffed. Nonsense, we were partners, equals. Were you? Or were you just the financier, the administrator, while Thorne was the true visionary? His intellect threatened to eclipse yours, didn't it? His latest project, the one he kept so close, was going to make him, and only him, legendary. You saw your own contributions, your own years of work, diminishing. You saw control of InnovateX slipping away, becoming Thorne's personal kingdom. My gaze locked onto theirs. That's the motive, isn't it? Not just corporate espionage, though that played a part. Not just stolen IP, though you certainly benefited from that. It was pure, unadulterated ambition, the fear of being irrelevant, the desire to own it all. The co-founder's jaw tightened. You have no proof, just wild speculation. Oh, but I do. Let's talk about the locked room, shall we? The police were baffled. Key on the inside, door bolted from within. Textbook suicide. Except for one thing. I stopped, pointing a finger at them. The scratch. Their eyes flickered just for a moment to their own wrist. A tell. My gut clenched. I was right. Everyone assumed it was a struggle, a last-ditch effort by Thorne to fight off his demons, I continued. But I saw it differently. The scratch on Thorne's wrist wasn't deep, not defensive. It was a thin, almost surgical line. And it wasn't from a fingernail or a struggle. It was from a tool. I paused, letting the words sink in. The co-founder remained still, but their breathing had become shallow. You knew the office, the building, the security systems better than anyone. You knew Thorne's habits, his projects, his weaknesses. Thorne resisted, perhaps not physically, but intellectually. He wouldn't back down, so you killed him, a quick, efficient death designed to look like self-inflicted despair. And then you faced the locked room problem, I pressed on. How to get out and leave the door locked from the inside. You couldn't just walk out and pull it shut. You needed an ingenious method, and you found one, didn't you? I watched their face, seeing the calculations, the sudden realization that I had pieced it together. You, co-founder of a leading AI tech startup, had access to the most advanced manufacturing and engineering capabilities. You designed and built a specialized tool, a thin, flexible, high-tensile wire, perhaps with a small, precision-machined hook at its end. You killed Thorne. Then you stepped out of the office, pulling the door almost shut behind you. Then, through the minuscule gap where the door met the frame, or perhaps through the keyhole itself, you inserted your custom tool. You manipulated the internal thumb turn, clicking the deadbolt into place. The scratch on Thorne's wrist, it wasn't from a fight. It was from that tool, UserCM. From the wire as you withdrew it, brushing against his hand, perhaps as he lay there, still twitching, or as you adjusted the angle. A tiny, almost invisible mark, but enough to tell me that someone had been operating something near his body after he was incapacitated. The co-founder's calm facade finally cracked. Their eyes blazed, a mix of fury and something that looked like grudging admiration. "You can't prove any of this," they hissed, their voice raw, echoing off the damp walls. "It's all conjecture, a story." "A story built on facts," I retorted, my voice firm. "The unique design of the lark, known only to a few, the precision of the scratch, the timing of your movements that day, the slight discrepancies in your alibi that only a close examination would reveal, and the fact that only I had the motive, the means, and the specific expertise to craft such a mechanism." The co-founder took a step back, their gaze darting around the desolate wing as if searching for an escape. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to choke on. I had laid it all out. I knew in that moment that they knew I had them, and the look in their eyes told me they were considering their next move, and it wasn't surrender. The co-founder took a step back, their gaze darting around the desolate wing as if searching for an escape. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the persistent drip of water from a cracked pipe somewhere down the corridor. The truth, stark and devoid of the gleaming corporate sheen they usually hid behind, hung heavy between us. "That's preposterous," the co-founder finally managed, their voice a strained whisper, attempting a laugh that died in their throat. "No physical evidence. It's all conjecture, UserCM." I took a slow step forward, the crunch of loose gravel under my boot echoing in the cavernous space. "No physical evidence. I forget, this isn't just about what's seen. It's about what's logged. InnovateX's entire infrastructure is digital. Every movement, every access point, every system command, it leaves a trace. I walked into Dr. Thorne's office that night, didn't I? After everyone else had gone home. I had a motive, his upcoming public revelation of the Project Chimera algorithm. He was going to announce it as his own, despite my significant contributions, or perhaps expose that you had already appropriated much of its core. My deductions were hitting home. "You incapacitated him," I continued, my voice calm, steady, a fast-acting sedative perhaps, enough to render him unconscious, but leave no obvious struggle. "Then you administered a lethal injection. Quick, clean, and easily disguised as a medical emergency or a self-inflicted act. You staged the scene meticulously. The note, crafted using InnovateX's own advanced AI, designed to mimic his linguistic patterns perfectly. You even scattered a few of his personal effects, making it look like a man at the end of his rope." I paused, letting that sink in, watching the last vestiges of their composure fray. "But here's where your brilliance failed you. The locked room. You left the office, confident that the door would appear locked from the inside. And it did, at first glance. But you didn't account for the granular detail of the building's smart system logs. You used your administrative override, the same system that controls everything from climate to security, to lock that office door, remotely. You triggered the lock command from your own secure device, once you were safely away from the building. The system registered the command, the door sealed shut, and it appeared locked from the inside. But the timestamp on your exit from the building's main security gate and the timestamp on the office door's locking mechanism, they don't align for a man who locked himself in and then died. Your exit occurred before the door was remotely triggered to lock. It's a tiny window, a few minutes, but it's there, a digital fingerprint clear as day. The co-founder's shoulders slumped. The pretense crumbled, revealing the raw fear beneath. He was going to ruin me, they choked out, their voice cracking, the words echoing eerily in the vast, empty space of the closed-down prison wing. Everything I built, everything I worked for. He was going to expose my past, claim my future. So you decided to take his, I finished, the finality of it hanging in the damp air. A crime of ambition, cloaked in technology. You thought you could use InnovateX's own brilliance to create the perfect alibi, but the very systems you mastered ultimately betrayed you. I heard the distant sirens growing louder, a mournful wail cutting through the night. I had notified the authorities earlier, instructing them to wait for my signal. This conversation, this confession, was the signal. The co-founder didn't resist when the uniformed officers, led by a stern-faced captain, entered the wing moments later. The captain gave me a curt nod, a silent acknowledgement of a job done. As they led the co-founder away, their figure seemed to shrink, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the corridor. The aftermath for InnovateX was swift and brutal. The news broke like a tsunami, washing away years of carefully curated image. Stock prices plummeted. Public trust evaporated. The dream of a benevolent AI future, once so vibrant under Dr. Thorne's vision, was now tainted by a nightmare of betrayal and murder. Other executives scrambled, issuing damage control statements, but the wound was too deep. The company would survive, perhaps, but it would never be the same. The gleaming facade had cracked, revealing the rot beneath. The city lights twinkled in the distance, indifferent to the human drama that had just unfolded. My car felt like a sanctuary. Another case closed, another life taken, another life ruined. For all the dazzling technology, the intricate algorithms, the boundless ambition that defined InnovateX, the motive had been ancient, primal, jealousy, fear, and the desperate hunger for control. It always came down to that, didn't it? The human element, messy and unpredictable, capable of both incredible creation and devastating destruction. No amount of innovation could truly shield us from ourselves. I started the engine, the low hum a comforting sound. The persistent drip of water in that desolate wing, I realized, was a fitting metaphor. Slowly, inexorably, the truth always finds a way to wear through the layers of deception, no matter how brilliantly constructed. And I, UserCM, would always be there to listen for it.